you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
What's up, you guys? Welcome to GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Cynthia, and happy Wednesday, everyone. I hope you guys are all having a fabulous day, fabulous night, whatever time you are tuning in to this episode right now. I hope things are just going well for you all. Let's see. I am doing okay. If you haven't tuned in to the last few episodes I've done, my family and I, we are dealing with a death. My tia, who was like my grandma, passed away on the 8th, and this morning was her funeral. Wednesday morning, was her funeral, so I'm just now getting around to recording for you guys for today's episode, but it has definitely built a day full of emotions, lots of crying, sadness, but also gratitude. Gratitude towards my tia for all of the amazing things she did for us, our family. She was really the one who brought everyone together, Christmas, Thanksgiving, always at her house. She instilled, values in us that will carry on forever and ever. So it's been rough. And, just trying to take it day by day, trying to occupy myself with different things. And so here we are. Let's get into what we're here to discuss. Not going to be anything sad or, about how I'm feeling and whatnot. We're going to just dive straight into spinal rotation exercise and everything that has to do with building spinal strength. Okay, that is the topic for today's episode. So it's going to be really interesting. Spinal health is something that tends to be overlooked when it comes to fitness and working out. People don't really understand and grasp how important it is to maintain a strong, healthy back, right? So building up the back strength is going to help build up the spinal strength. Many strength coaches are big on rotary strength, right, and stability. And while we love our Pallof Press movements, which is basically like you use a very long band, you tie it to a pole or like a squat rack, something like that, and you're holding that band in between your hands and you are pushing and kicking or pushing and punching out with your arms and then slowly resisting that band back to your chest, and again, big exhale punch, and then slowly resisting the weight back in. And this is a really great exercise to do, the Pallof Press, to help build up shoulder strength as well as core stability. Since you are basically fighting the resistance, you are fighting against the weight of the band or the tension of the band pulling you towards the pole. So you're trying to keep those arms straight as much as possible as you are going through the motion. So while we love this movement, the Pallof Press movement, which fall under the core stability umbrella since the core remains stable. We also love our cable chop and lift movements and our landmine movements, which may or may not fall under the core movement umbrella, depending on how the movements are performed, with or without spinal rotation, in addition to med ball rotational movements. Some coaches feel that spinal rotation strengthening should be avoided completely. Some coaches believe that spinal rotation strengthening should be performed, but the movement should occur at the thoracic spine and the hips while the lumbar spine is locked down. And some coaches think that spinal rotation strengthening is great and you don't need to cue anything because the body is smart and knows how, where, and when to rotate. So a lot of different information out there. Each coach kind of thinks differently in terms of rotational strength exercises. And in this specific article titled, "Is Rotation Training Hurting Your Performance?" by Mike Boyle, he quotes Shirley Shamaron, who states the following: "The thoracic spine, not the lumbar spine, should be the site of greatest amount of rotation of the trunk. When an individual practices rotational exercises, he or she should be instructed to think about the motion occurring in the area of the chest." Okay, so that's what that specific article, or that quote, was pulled from that article. Mark Buckley does an excellent job of discussing the biomechanics of spinal rotation exercises in this free PDF, and he states that rotation is not the concern, where the rotation takes place is the concern. Mark Buckley goes on to state that thoracic rotation accounts for 60 to 70 degree segmental contribution as high as 7 to 10 degree in the mid-thoracic area at T3, T9 of rotary movement in the spine, while lumbar rotation only accounts for 10 to 15 degree segmental contribution as small as 0 to 2 degrees at L1, L5, and 0 to 5 degrees at L5, S1 of rotary movement in the spine. I know I just threw a lot of numbers and letters at you guys right now, so I hope you guys are still following along with the conversation, because it will get nerdy up in here, okay? So stick with me. Don't go anywhere. In this article by Rkc, he pointed out that in this study, it was shown that in the lumbar spine, 52% of the subjects had a bulge at least one level. 27% had a protrusion and 1% had an extrusion. 38% had an abnormality of more than one intervertebral disc. Last year, I was pulling up research pertaining to the thoracic discs, and I stumbled upon some interesting and perplexing information. In one study, it stated that thoracic herniations occur with much less frequency than lumbar or cervical herniations. And this study reports that thoracic herniations are responsible for only 0.15 to 1.8% of all spinal herniations. However, more recent research paints a different picture. In another study involving 90 individuals, 37% of asymptomatic individuals had at least one thoracic disc herniation. 54% had a disc bulge. 58% had an annular tear. 29% had deformation in the spinal cord. And 28% had Sherman end plate irregularities or kyphosis. And this study, conducted in 2007, which claims to be the largest study in the world's literature on the topic of thoracic disc herniation, states that thoracic disc herniations occur in 50% of patients and that 26% of patients had multiple herniations. This study suggests or states that degenerative disc disease and disc herniations are the most prevalent thoracic spine abnormalities and that disc herniations predominate in the lower thoracic segment and are a dynamic phenomenon. Interestingly, while disc degeneration does not improve, thoracic herniations are in a state of constant flux. This study shows that 27% of disc herniations improved over a 4 through 149 week range of follow-up. After a mean follow-up period of 26 months, 48 previously looked at discs in this study were examined, and they found that 3 of 21 small disc herniations increased in size. 1 of 20 and 3 of 20 medium discs increased and decreased in size respectively, and 4 of 7 large disc herniations decreased in size. It appears that the method of imaging matters, as this study showed that 21 of 48 thoracic discs appeared healthy when using MRI. But when using discography, only 10 of 48 appeared normal. Studies involving discography likely underestimate spinal abnormalities. This study shows that lumbar facet joints carry no load inflection and large loads during extension. 205 north at a 10 nm movement and a 190 N axial load. Torsion 65 N at a 10 nm movement and a 150 north axial load, and lateral bending 78 north at a 3 nm movement and a 160 north axial load. Thoracic facet joint pain versus lumbar facet joint pain. This study showed that the prevalence of facet joint pain was 39% in the cervical spine, 34% in the thoracic spine, and 27% in the lumbar spine. This study showed that painful thoracic facets occurred in 42% of individuals with thoracic pain, while only 31% of individuals with low back pain suffer from painful lumbar facets. However, of the 500 people with chronic spinal pain involved in the study, only 6% had painful thoracic facets and 25% had painful lumbar facets. During the background portion of the article, the author stated that facet joints have been implicated as a cause of chronic spinal pain in 15 to 45% of patients with chronic low back pain, 48% of patients with thoracic pain, and 54 to 67% of patients with chronic neck pain. Poor hip mobility most likely increases the risk of low back pain in Rotary sport athletes. This study stated that among people who participate in rotation-related sports, those with LBP had less overall passive hip rotation motion and more asymmetry of rotation between sides than people without LBP. This makes perfect sense, as individuals possessing insufficient hip internal and external rotation mobility will be forced to compensate and rotate more at the lumbar spine. Over time, this will usually result in injury and/or pain if left unchecked. So you guys, we are going to cut into a very, very brief break, and when we come back, we're going to discuss more on spinal rotation exercises and lumbar thoracic pain association. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. We are in the most unprecedented times of our lives. We can feel really lonely right now, not being able to communicate with others face to face like we would like to. Luckily, myhealthteam.com created social networks for communities of people facing chronic conditions. Everything from lupus and multiple sclerosis to autism, breast cancer, and so much more. We believe that when people facing the same chronic condition are able to connect with and learn from each other, ask questions, get referrals, and share tips with other people who personally understand what it's like to face that condition, health outcomes improve. You're not alone, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Join an online support community at myhealthteam.com.
Are you looking to learn more about the latest trends from the fitness world? Are you confused by all of the different trends that are out there? The GSMC Fitness Podcast is the place for you. The GSMC Fitness Podcast is the place to come for people of all skill and interest levels. Join us as we explore the latest trends in the fitness world. Does that new exercise really work? Should I try yoga? Whatever your question, chances are good you'll find an answer on the GSMC Fitness Podcast.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back to GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast. Right before the break, I was discussing how poor hip mobility most likely increases the risk of low back pain in rotary sport athletes. And we are just going to continue on with the conversation. I know I'm sharing a lot of dense information right now, but this is all really important info that I think will help us better understand why spinal health is so important and how spinal rotational exercises can help improve our spinal health. Rotational exercises are safer with some axial preloading. So let me explain. In this article, Nick Tuminello quotes late great Mel Sliff. A certain degree of compressive preloading locks the facet assembly of the spine and makes it more resistant to torsion. This is a reason why trunk rotation without vertical compression may cause disc injury, whereas the same movement performed with compression is significantly safer. Let's say that a certain movement requires 60 degrees of spinal rotation. Do you want all 60 degrees of rotation occurring in the 12 thoracic motion segments with absolutely zero motion occurring in the 5 lumbar motion segments? Would this be the safest method of execution? And is this a natural movement pattern? Or would it be safer if the individual rotated, for example, 55 total degrees in the 12 thoracic motion segments and 5 total degrees in the 5 lumbar segments? Is some lumbar rotation natural and beneficial, or do you want to completely lock it up by cueing all motion in the chest T-spine area? Aren't end ranges of spinal motion the most dangerous for the discs? What if we want to distribute and load evenly rather than concentrate it in one region? Does architecture with the lumbar spine and thoracic spine we're built for matter when thoracic discs and facets get beat up just like the lumbar discs and facets? Are spinal rotation exercises even worthwhile, considering they are high risk. Should we ever do any spinal rotation under load, or is it wiser to stick to just rotary stability exercises for the spine, where the spine stays motionless while rotary forces are prevented? It's a lot to think about, ain't it? It's a lot to think about. Again, like I said, we are getting nerdy on today's episode, so I hope you guys aren't too lost and, you're still able to follow along with everything that I just said. So, to reiterate, there's a 2-step process. First, you have to increase hip and T-spine mobility and work on static rotational core stability. And number 2, move to dynamic rotational core stability and eventually rotational strength with some spinal movement involved. As far as cueing to move at the chest, I believe that it's best to err on the side of caution and try to get most of the mobility in the T-spine rather than involving the lumbar spine. Even though discs at all spinal regions appear to take a serious beating and develop herniations, and even though facet joint pain seems to occur at all spinal regions as well, it makes sense to look at the architecture of the spine and try to determine its optimal function. Furthermore, many novices erroneously believe that spinal rotation should occur mostly in the lumbar spine, and they therefore actively attempt to twist to end range lumbar rotation. This is highly dangerous. If individuals think of movement occurring in the chest, they'll stay tall and properly distribute stress over a broad range of joint structures, which will minimize tissue damage and the likelihood of injury. I'm sure that even when individuals attempt to lock down the lumbar spine, there is still some slight but not dangerous motion involved. Evidence shows that there is a huge genetic component to disc degeneration and herniations. While trainers and coaches like to believe that we can prevent the onset of spinal degradation by teaching the body to move properly via mobility, stability activation drills, and proper cueing for motor control feedback, it appears that there is only so much we can do. I only perform myself and prescribe to clients spinal rotation work twice per week and stay away from end ranges. 2 sets of 6 to 10 reps is the typical volume. 1 day per week usually involves anti-rotation. The spine stays neutral and resists rotation, while the other day involves axial rotation. The spine twists a bit. So what's your guys' take, alright? I want to know, do you think our spinal rotation movement's worth the risk? If so, where should the rotation occur? How should the exercises be cued? And how frequent should they be prescribed? Alright? What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. I would love to hear from you and, just get your opinion on all this, because I know it was quite a lot of info. But still on the topic of just spinal rotation, we're now going to head into the direction of speaking on standing rotary training. And it's a whole body training. And I'm going to be quite honest. I love rotary training. I believe it helps bridge the gap between traditional weight room strength and on-the-field power. Any fool will realize that simply increasing muscle mass via heavy compound lifting, and let's ignore performance-enhancing substances, will improve rotary power. Just look at guys like Mark McGuire, Sammy Sosa, and Barry Bonds. These guys could practically bunt home runs after they sufficiently increase their muscle hypertrophy. This is due to the fact that standing rotation power relies on high contraction velocities via a bunch of different muscles throughout the human body. On a scale of 1 to 10, general training through heavy compound movement might get you to an 8. But if you want to reach your maximum capacity, you need to perform specific rotary movements. For example, squat strength is important, but it's not the end all be all for shot putters using the rotational technique. Loads aren't the only determinants of spinal loading and muscle force requirements. Standing rotary exercises are usually performed with loads held at arm's length, which create exceptionally long levers and high torques at the spine, which are countered through ground reaction forces at the feet. For this reason, all of the joints between the arms and feet are called into play, making rotary training a highly effective form of total body training. You've got spinal rotation, hip internal rotation in the front leg, and hip external rotation in the rear leg, all summating to generate maximum torque, which is transferred through the body from the feet to the hands. And this requires a tremendous blend of stability, mobility, propulsive power, and coordination. Despite the fact that modest levels of resistance are often used during rotary training, the long levers and multiple muscles involved in producing or preventing rotation produce large compressive loads on the spine and require high thresholds of neuromuscular and metabolic activity. This is why a couple of sets of rotary training can leave you quite exhausted. Sports mastery requires hip power. Most people throw in some token rotary training toward the end of their sessions and try to feel the movement solely in their obliques. While the obliques are certainly important for rotary power, so are the gluteus maximus and other hip external rotators. In fact, I believe that a strong, powerful gluteus maximus is often what separates the elite athlete from the average athlete, in my opinion. As athletes advance, they learn to incorporate their hip and leg musculature into their movements to a much higher degree. For example, beginner shot putters use predominantly their upper body muscles when throwing, whereas advanced shot putters use predominantly their leg muscles. The correlation between athletic achievements and beginner athletes' arm strength is 0.83, whereas the correlation between athletic achievements and beginner athletes' leg strength is 0.37. That means they're not using their legs enough. For advanced athletes, the correlations flip-flop to 0.73 and 0.87 respectively. In other words, in order for athletes to advance, they must learn how to derive maximum power from the hips and legs. So it's not just obliques. Elite golfers show greater angular velocities of trunk rotation than less skilled golfers, and higher spinal rotation is correlated with increased clubhead speed. Upper torso and pelvis separation, called the X factor, is a must for maximum golfing proficiency. However, when you perform rotary movements, don't try to target the spinal muscles. You need to get the hips into the mix for a couple different reasons. Chan et al. Found that rotary motion was indeed healthy for the lumbar discs as long as end ranges were avoided. How can going to end range lumbar rotation during explosive movement be prevented? First, ensure proper hip and thoracic spine mobility, and second, make sure the hips are strong and powerful so they're used extensively during rotation tasks. For this reason, I recommend really trying to feel the glute and other hip external rotators of the rear leg working hard during standard rotational exercises, and you should even feel the hip internal rotators of the front leg assisting in the task. If you want to know which muscles act as hip external rotators and which muscles act as hip internal rotators, you need to know how much flexion is involved at the hip, as the levers change as the hip moves from a neutral position into flexion. Delp et al. Examined these changing roles and found functional subdivisions of muscles and altering roles of hip rotators. And you guys, we are going to cut into a very brief break. And when we come back, more on hip rotation and rotational training.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hey guys, welcome back to GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast. Right before the break, we went over sports mastery and how it requires a lot of hip power, specifically glute power, and not just obliques, right? We know obliques are important for rotary training, but our backside, our glutes, have a huge part in that as well. And strong glutes is really what separates, as I said in the previous segment, strong glutes separates an elite athlete versus an average athlete. So, athletes, if you're listening to this episode right now and you are trying to reach your maximum potential, y'all need to make sure you are training your glutes consistently and effectively, all right? So, let's get back to the subject here. If you examine this chart, you'll realize that the hip external rotators vary considerably between a standing exercise, where the hips are more neutral, than the bottom of a squatting or single leg squatting motion, where the hips are substantially flexed. At hips neutral, posterior glute, medium and minimum, anterior and posterior glute max, piriformis, quad firm, opt-in, and opt-x are hip external rotators, whereas anterior glute med and min and ellipsoid are hip internal rotators. At hips flexed 90 degrees, some of anterior glute max and posterior glute max, ellipsoid, quad fem, opt-in, and opt-x are hip external rotators, whereas anterior and posterior glute med and min, most of anterior glute max and piriformis are internal rotators. Rotary training and landing mechanics. Recent research has shown that standing rotary training can improve landing mechanics in the absence of jumping exercise. Both of these studies involving a ground force 360, which looks pretty badass to me, but I have never experimented with it. In a nutshell, proper landing mechanics require rapid hip abduction and external rotation moments, torques, about the hips in order to prevent valgus collapse. Knee valgus is characterized by hip adduction and hip internal rotation and can be quite detrimental to knee health. It leads to patellofemoral pain and performance. The studies above showed that improving neuromuscular output through rotary training led to improved landing efficiency, which is very interesting considering that no jump training was performed. This suggests that rotary training can transfer to a myriad of tasks such as jumping, landing, squatting, climbing, throwing, striking, and swinging. Hell, Louis Simmons even noticed increased deadlifting strength after using the grappler. Now here are some of the best rotary exercises, y'all. In a perfect world, we'd all have access to a ground force 360. Since this is not the case, especially during these times of COVID where, gym equipment is limited and scarce and everything is closed, standing rotary exercises can be performed with bands and cables to stimulate various chopping and lifting motions in different positions, including tall kneeling, half kneeling, split stance, and parallel stances. Band exercises that challenge the hips have been used quite effectively in improving golf mechanics and performance. Medicine balls can be used for higher contraction velocities. So here are a few of my favorites, y'all, so listen up and pay attention. The first is the band hip rotation. If you do this one right, your glute activation could soar through the roof as well. Then we have the half kneeling cable anti-rotation press. This isn't performed standing, but the rear glute and hip rotators get worked tremendously. Then we have the band rotary hold. And I actually like this more than Pallof pressing, as I never feel like the pulses adequately tax me. And then rotational med ball shot put. I definitely recommend learning chops and lifts this way as beginners. Lack segmental control in the spine and don't know where to move and how much to move. Over time, as this control is mastered, I recommend progressing towards some slight movement in the spine, but not much, and progression to standing stances. I like bands more than cables for hip rotations and rotary holds, but I like cables more than bands for variations of chops and lifts. Often beginner women find the band movements problematic and do better with cable rotation movements until they get stronger and can use the bands efficiently. So here's my conclusion for you all. Hopefully this specific subject we just went through has given you some food for thought. Most lifters do not view standing rotary work as effective full body training. This couldn't be further from the truth, and if you get freakishly strong at these movements, then you'll know what I'm talking about. I've been teaching the band hip rotation to some big and strong rugby athletes, and they're amazed at how weak they are initially at this movement. Within a couple of months, strength skyrockets on these movements, which is very important for balance strength. As far as programming is concerned, I like to perform just 2 sets on each side for 8 to 12 reps, and I do this at the end of my training sessions. Sure, my long segments help with rotational inertia, but whenever I see a punching bag arcade game like the ones below, I always test it out and I'm usually able to set the all-time record. I credit some of this to the consistent amount of rotational work that I do week in and week out. So there you have it. The standing rotary training is absolutely whole body training. And I really hope you guys liked that subject that we just went through. So now, still on the subject of just, building up your core strength and all of that, we're going to talk a little bit about core stability training for the advanced lifter. So I gave y'all some examples, some rotational exercises for beginners, but we're going to switch on over to core stability for the advanced lifter. Core stability training has been all the rage in the fitness field over the past decade, for good reason. Learning to move at the hips while keeping the spine stable is crucial for new lifters. While most lifters and trainers are well aware of simple core exercises that are properly suited for beginners, many aren't well versed in progressing these exercises to suit more advanced lifters. Too many lifters extend the duration of basic planking drills as their primary method of progressive overload, which builds strength endurance. But what about strength and power? A strong, powerful core is needed to stabilize the body during heavy lifting and explosive sporting actions. Right now, I'm going to go over some of the most effective core exercises that more advanced lifters could add to their libraries and discuss ways to make some of the classics a little more challenging. So you don't need to just do, planks. Like, there's more to core training than just planks. You need some explosive, powerful movements in there to get that core fired up. So let's begin. Before I delve into exercises, I want to first discuss the core. The core refers to more than just the abs, right? It encompasses the entire musculature of the torso, including the abdominals, obliques, erectors, glutes, hip flexors, lats, adductors, and more. Like, your core is basically your entire midsection, so it's not just abs. The core acts on the shoulders, scapulae, spine, pelvis, and hips. At the spine, it can produce, reduce, and resist spinal flexion, extension, lateral flexion, and rotation. It's responsible for transmitting forces from the upper body to lower body. If you want to learn more info, you guys can read Strategies for Optimal Core Training Program Design for a comprehensive article on core training, which I wrote with Brad Schoenfeld. As you can see, proper core training will require more than just a couple of sets of crunches or hanging leg raises. Unfortunately, many lifters don't train the core in its entirety, which leads to suboptimal results. While the core doesn't require a ton of extra attention, assuming a lifter is already performing squats, deadlifts, hip thrusts, chin-ups, presses, and rows, additional exercises are indeed needed to fill gaps. To train the core completely, one must consider the joints in play, the possible actions at each joint, and the common force vectors the lifter is seeking to strengthen. When training core stability, you are enhancing the body's ability to resist movement. Hence, the exercises can be considered anti-movement exercises. So let's first talk about the Sumo stance band anti-rotation holds. The Sumo stance band rotation hold trains the ability to resist rotation. Since the Sumo stance is wider and has a bigger base of support, more weight can be used than in a traditional stance band rotational hold. You want to find the sweet spot where you're going as heavy as possible without leaning or twisting during the set's duration. First, attach a band to an immovable object. Power racks are preferred, but machines work well too. We typically use a Pro Mini or light long band, but the band you use will be dependent on your strength levels. You can use a lighter band and just walk out further for more resistance. Take the free end of the band and grip it on both hands double overhand. Walk the band out until the desired amount of tension is reached. Take a sumo stance with knees slightly bent in an athletic stance with good posture. Keep a fairly uptight torso with the hands near the chest. Keeping the spine in a neutral, extend the arms straight out in front of you so that the elbows are fully extended and the hands are chest level. You should be out far enough that when you extend your arms, they make a 90-degree angle with the band. This exercise may be done for time or reps. We typically do 2 to 3 sets of 10 to 20 second holds on each side, 1 to 2 times per week. So again, that in a nutshell is the sumo stance band anti-rotation hold. We are going to cut into a very brief break, you guys. And when we come back, we'll discuss about the loaded Rkc planks. So don't go anywhere. Did you know that more than 1 in 3 Americans are living with a chronic health condition? Are you one of them? MyHealthTeam.com has a mission. If you are diagnosed with a chronic disease, it should be easy to find the best people around to help you. Serving 40 different chronic health conditions with over 2 million members and over 10 million conversations, there's a team available for you. Whether you are living with multiple sclerosis, Crohn's or colitis, lupus, psoriasis, eczema, or heart disease, we have a team of members to connect with, share stories, tips, advice, and most of all, support. You guys are not alone. Visit myhealthteam.com to find out more and find your team.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back to GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast. We are now entering the final segment of today's show, and as promised, we are going to kick off this final segment talking about the next exercise here, which are loaded Rkc Planks. The Rkc Plank looks very similar to a normal plank, with a few subtle differences. In the Rkc Plank, the elbows can be further out in front, which lengthens the lever. The feet and arms can be closer together, which narrows the base of support. Finally, the pelvis is posteriorly tilted with a giant glute squeeze, which causes the anterior core, along with the glutes, to fire much harder. We will place between 1 and 4 45-pound plates on the low back of the lifter. Rather than attempt to hold for a longer time, we attempt to use more load or alter technique so that the static hold is more challenging. Even with advanced lifters, 20 seconds is about the max time we'll go for with this movement. We typically do 2 to 3 sets of 10 to 20 second holds, 1 to 2 times per week. Next, we have hollow body holds. The best core exercises often seem overly simple, but when performed correctly, they are very challenging. This is definitely the case with the hollow body hold, which it's a love-hate for me because I know my core is working. I know my core is strengthening and firing up, but they are hard, okay? Hollow body holds are difficult. The hollow body hold trains anti-extension and will be performed for time rather than reps. Again, 15 to 30 seconds for 2 to 3 sets, 1 to 2 times per week is sufficient to get an ideal training effect from these. So first, lie on your back with the legs straightened out and the arms extended overhead. From this supine position, you'll elevate the legs and arms off the floor and press your low back into the ground. Flattening out the lumbar spine and holding tension in the core, make sure you elevate just enough so that your anterior core is really fighting the extension moment being created. If you go too high, you'll make the exercise easier and cheat yourself on the benefits it provides. Dumbbells and ankle weights can be used to increase difficulty of the exercise. Next, we have loaded dead bugs, which are deceiving. These look easy, but just like the hollow body holds, they absolutely are not. Okay, they are challenging if done correctly. Loaded dead bugs are actually one of my favorite core exercises to implement into my training routine, so I definitely recommend this one. This is another classic anti-extension core stability exercise. It's the loaded dead bug. However, this drill is not challenging enough for the typical advanced lifter, so modifications are in order. Slowing the movement down and holding the bottom position while exhaling fully on each rep will increase the difficulty, but many lifters will move past this point quickly as well. When body weight is too easy, we load the movement up to achieve progressive overload. Ankle weights may also be added to the lower extremities if they are available, but it's typically the arms that get too light first. Just 5 to 10 pounds will add enough difficulty for most lifters, but you can go heavier than this, so as long as you control the movement, you'll set up for a regular dead bug holding a weight in each hand. Dumbbells or plates may be used. Lower opposite arm and opposite leg to just above the ground. Exhale and return to the start position before lowering the next pair of limbs. The dead bug is one of those movements where it's up to the lifter to make difficult. You can go through the motion without engaging the core very much, or it can be one of the most challenging anti-extension drills in your library. So make sure you're staying tight throughout the movement and do not let the spine hyperextend or the pelvis anteriorly rotate. We prefer to keep our lumbar spines flattened out on these, but a neutral spine and pelvis is preferred by many trainers. 2 to 3 sets of 5 to 10 reps on each side performed 1 to 2 times a week is recommended. Next, we have landmines. The landmine trains the torso's ability to resist motion. The bar actually induces lateral flexion torque, rotation torque, and flexion torque on the spine, so the core has to work hard to remain stable. Not only is it a fantastic core exercise, it's fun and jacks the heart rate up pretty high as well. You'll need to set up in front of a landmine or grappler unit, but if one is not available, a barbell stuck into a corner will suffice as well. Pick up one end of the landmine, either fist over fist or with an interlocked grip. How far away you stand will depend on your arm length and height. Once your grip is set, the forearm should make a 90-degree angle with the bar. In an athletic stance, keeping the core engaged, extend the arms out in front but don't lock them out completely. Drop the landmine down towards one hip without bending the elbows, and while maintaining some distance from the landmine, return to the start position and drop to the other side. The majority of the motion should take place at the shoulders. Remember, You're trying to resist spinal motion, so keep the core braced and don't let the weight control you. For variety, you can pivot and rotate around the bar. And if you have a grappler, you may do them like this. If performing these, 2 to 3 sets of 10 reps on each side, 1 to 2 times a week will suffice. Next, we got another one that I love to hate, the ab wheel rollout. I truly hate these, you guys. The ab wheel rollout is a great progression once you've mastered planks and stability rollouts. The rollout trains anti-extension and may be progressed further by adding a band to the ab wheel. First, kneel down on some type of padding. Take the ab wheel in both hands and center your body over it. Before descending, extend the hips, squeeze the glutes, and engage the core. This alignment should be kept throughout the movement. To descend, think about sinking your hips to the ground as your arms extend forward. Don't envision reaching with the arms. Once you've hit the lowest point, pause for a second, then pull the arms back underneath the body until the start position is reached. Make sure to not allow the low back to arch or the pelvis to anteriorly tilt during the movement. Another common mistake is allowing the hips to flex too much on the way up. This motor strategy utilizes the hip flexors to pull the body backward, but it's not ideal. Think of this exercise as a moving Rkc plank. We do 2 to 3 sets of 6 to 15 reps, 1 to twice a week. If the kneeling version is too easy, try negatives from the standing position. If this is too easy, be like Ross and Amat and do them one arm with a weighted vest or utilizing a ramp or pausing isometrically. Next, we have the off-bench oblique hold. The off-bench oblique hold trains the body's ability to resist lateral flexion. You can think of it as a loaded progression for the side plank. Set up in a GHR laterally with the bottom foot out front and the top foot behind you. The GHR pad should be positioned at the side of the hip. Your hips and knees should be fully extended. The glutes should be tensed and the torso should be completely straight. Grab a dumbbell with the bottom arm and return to neutral. Hold this position for the prescribed duration. 2 to 3 sets of 20 to 30 second holds once or twice a week is sufficient. You can also do these off of a standard bench. Then lastly, we have the suitcase hold. The suitcase hold is another anti-lateral flexion drill and is very easy to set up. Simply place a dumbbell or kettlebell on a bench or step. Stand next to the weight so that it is at your side. Pick it up with the hand and stand tall. You want to keep the shoulder girdle engaged, spine neutral, and glutes squeezed throughout the duration. Make sure you don't go so heavy that you have to lean or rest the weight on your side to get through it. Go heavy enough for a good challenge, but be able to maintain good alignment the entire time. A barbell can be used in the power rack to enable even heavier loading. 2 to 3 sets of 20 to 30 second holds once or twice a week is sufficient. So to conclude, you guys, I've provided you with some very challenging core stability exercises. The Rkc Plank, hollow body hold, dead bug, and ab wheel rollout will strengthen your anti-extension spinal stability strength. The off-bench oblique hold and suitcase carry will strengthen your anti-lateral flexion spinal stability strength. And the Sumo band anti-rotation hold and Landmine will strengthen your anti-rotation spinal stability strength. Many of these exercises will strengthen the pelvic and hip musculature as they strengthen the spinal musculature, since the movements require stability at all 3 body regions. If you're astute, you might be wondering about anti-flexion spinal stability strength. If you read this blog, then I'm assuming you already perform squats and deadlifts, in which case you're very effectively strengthening spinal anti-flexion stability. A stronger core can improve performance and prevent injuries. If you're an advanced lifter seeking challenging core stability drills, give the exercises mentioned in today's episode a try. And definitely let me know in the comments if, they're challenging, which was your favorite, your least favorite, and so forth. So, you guys, that is all that I have for today. That's going to wrap up today's episode here at the GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast. I really like to thank each and every one of you who tuned in into today's episode. If you enjoyed today's topic, please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment, all of that stuff, because that tremendously helps the show. And I'll catch you guys here next week.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Health and Wellness Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.
Living with a medical condition can be hard. My health team gives you the support you need. Meet others living with a medical condition and gain insights on managing treatment today. Join an online support community at myhealthteam.com.